Vasu Gounden. I am the executive director of the African Center for the Constructive Resolution of Disputes, better known as ACCORD, an organization that has been working for the last 30 years in Africa, resolving political disputes. I think, firstly, I get up in the morning and I'm really eager to get to the office. Many people don't like going to work. I like going to work simply because not every day is the same. We deal in a very dynamic environment. Conflicts don't wait for people. They develop on a daily basis. You might have a conflict that erupts, and unless that conflict is rolled back soon enough, it can morph into something else. So the environment is a very dynamic one. And, we don't deal with divorce disputes or labor disputes. We deal in high political disputes, mainly in civil wars in countries. There were many Sharpevilles later in South Africa. And I was not even born when Sharpeville took place, but certainly my father, who has been involved in politics for a long, long time, was alive during that period. And what Sharpeville did, so what you had in South Africa was that every time there was a mass of resistance, the government clamped down very heavily. And Sharpeville was in essence a build-up in South Africa to mass resistance. And as you know, the killings that took place in Sharpeville on that fateful day of March 21st, which we will now commemorate again this year. And I'm so happy that we're going to do this with Peace One Day, not focusing just on South Africa, but focusing on racial elimination and discrimination across the world. But on that day, the 21st of March, the government came down heavily, killed 69 people, and then went on a massive raid to clamp down on political resistance by arresting people, etc. And that set off a wave of resistance inside the country. So South Africa under apartheid saw many kind of waves and lulls and waves and lulls, and the 60s was a period when the government came down very heavily. In fact, my own father was arrested during that period, spent 3 months in prison, tortured. So I felt that very much as a little young guy who could see his father being arrested and taken away. I was 2 or 3 years old at the time. I understand what this day means, not just for us, but for people all across the world. You and I have had the opportunity to be mentally liberated through our interaction with people across the world from different cultures, different races, different classes. And so we have now the ability to transcend the stereotypes that might have been planted in our heads. We transcend the fear of the other, and this comes from knowledge and education. And what's driving this today is fear, is ignorance, is the fact that people don't interact with each other. And unfortunately, social media is having a kind of dual impact on this. On the positive side, I think young people in their teens, in their early 20s, who are part of this generation, who know nothing else but social media. They don't know that social media never existed, and they are able to connect in a way across borders, across barriers, or racial barriers, all of these identity barriers. They're able to cross this and really see people for who they are. But then there is a generation, and I'm afraid that we will influence this younger generation. There is a generation, and we see it in our country, and this is a generation who thrive on being part of a identity echo chamber. So you're in your very narrow echo chamber, either in your racial chamber, your religious chamber, your ethnic chamber. And what happens in that is that the ignorance and the fear and all of that festers, gets reinforced. You know, 27 years, and I'd never been to the home of a white person for dinner. And the first time I go to the home of a white person for dinner is in Washington, D.C., not even in my own country. And I'm saying that's how pervasive apartheid was, that it siloed you into your racial enclaves as part of the Group Areas Act. So you lived in a certain group, you went to work and interacted with a certain group of people, you came back and you socialized with the same group of people, and that was, what apartheid did. And you see the repercussions of that today, because unless you have someone like me who's managed to escape all of this and have had all these interactions, I've traveled the world like you, I've gone to countries all over Africa, all over Asia, and I sit down and I talk to everybody, whether it's the car guard or the president or I just talk to everybody. And this allows me to interact in a way and transcend these barriers. Of course, growing up, the fact that you had to go to swim in a separate beach. So there would be, beaches for white people, beaches for colored people, beaches for African people, Indian people. There was no, they didn't put a barrier in the ocean, but, there was a stretch. You knew you didn't cross that stretch. And if you did, there would be a policeman who was guarding all of this, who would come and pull you out of the ocean. So, that was the petty discrimination. Of course, that was complemented with the deep structural racism that ensured that, privilege, opportunity, skills, capital were monopolized by one group to the disadvantage of the other groups. If ourselves as South Africa, we are the poster child for racial discrimination, and if after 25 years of huge effort, of the goodwill of a Mandela and all of that, we weren't able to change the deep consequences of apartheid, that if we have a similar thing across the world, we will plunge the world into a crisis of racial discrimination leading to divisions that will impact heavily on a socially cohesive global community at a time when this global community needs to be socially cohesive, because the problems and the challenges that we face are challenges that are global. The challenges of climate change, the challenges of a pandemic, the challenges of nuclear war. All of these are challenges that are global. And what we need is cooperation and collaboration. We have to take responsibility for the world that we are in right now. And part of taking responsibility for this world is to ensure that all of the things that are dividing us as nations, dividing us as continents, dividing us as individuals, and dividing us as gender, as generations, it's only us who can put the new narratives on the table that allow us to move from perception and rumors and fear and ignorance and start to embrace more the facts of the things that unite us in the world, that give us a common legacy, that gives us a common future. And we need to focus more on those things. And so I think picking a day like the 21st of March, a day when, was marked by 69 people losing their lives because they stood up for the truth, and they stood up for a more equitable world, and they stood up against discrimination, that in order to honor their lives, we ought to also come together